Force is strong in my family. The Force is strong in my family. My father has it. My father has it. I have it. I have it. My sister has it. My sister has it. You have that power too. You have that power too. In time, you'll learn to use it as I have.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Chewie, we're home.
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it. It's episode number 32. I am your host, Jon Justice of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. And I never really bothered to add up how many podcasts it would be until we reached this moment. And kind of the whole reason why I did this podcast in the first place was to one day be able to give you my full spoiler review and breakdown after having seen now twice Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Look, I'll just say up front, I loved it. And after seeing it now a second time, it may be now my favorite Star Wars movie. And there's a lot of qualifiers in saying that, okay? We all have our different qualifications when it comes to ranking our Star Wars movies, or any franchise for that matter. I tend to look at where I'm at currently, sort of in my life, and not to get too grandiose, but I think about what Star Wars movie is going to be my go-to Star Wars movie when I want to watch a Star Wars film, when I just want to watch Star Wars. It's going to be Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. You can't have it without the originals. You don't get any of these without A New Hope. I don't think you get the flavor and the vibe and the story and some of the beats of The Force Awakens without The Empire Strikes Back. You don't get any of it without the prequels. But when it comes to just pure enjoyment of a film now and the Star Wars movies moving forward, this one has everything that I want in a Star Wars movie, including this theme. This is Rey's theme. I absolutely adore this theme. It's absolutely fantastic. I only adore it a little bit less than I adore Rey. She was just spectacular. I love my wife, but I'm in love with Rey. I just think as a person, as a character, she's great. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I've got a list of things that I want to run down in the podcast today. So this is what we'll do. I want to give you a little bit of my story of watching the film. My initial thoughts were kind of surprising to me because they were positive. I liked it, but I had an issue. And then as time went on, those issues resolved themselves, and I'll explain. I went out and saw it again yesterday, planning on going and seeing it again. Then I want to get into the story itself. And I want to add a few things before we start talking about the movie and the story and the plot and the characters, because I have a list of the sort of novelization spoilers, if you will. So if you're planning on reading the novel or listening to the audiobook of The Force Awakens and you don't want to be spoiled as to what else it reveals, then I will tell you when, and you can skip over that portion of the podcast. And then I want to spend some time going and talking about Episode 8 and where I think we are headed now, given the state of the galaxy. And then lastly, we'll discuss, or I will talk about what the box office returns so far are and how my prediction, and look, my observation is correct. And that as a society right now, the recipe and all the ingredients were parked Let me rephrase. The recipe and all the ingredients are in the mix, and now what is being cooked and what is being served is the byproduct of that, and that is a society that needed Star Wars and that is now responding to Star Wars, and how Star Wars now will, if there was any doubt whatsoever that there would not be Star Wars movies in perpetuity long after I'm gone, that is erased now. Because Star Wars is going to be bigger than even it was before this movie. Because multiple generations are coming out to see this film, and there is a brand new generation that is getting caught up in it that will now carry on the fandom in a way that I don't think anybody could have really, truly predicted or understood. So let me talk about just my experience briefly. I got off of work on Thursday, had tickets for the 7 o'clock showing, IMAX experience here in Tucson, and went and got in line right around 1:30 for the 7 o'clock showing. I actually came home, took a bit of a nap, just wanted to refresh, and grabbed my iPad and my iPhone. Isn't it amazing you can use your iPhone as a Wi-Fi hotspot? That's the greatest thing ever. And it was a great experience. You know, I have an added luxury because a lot of people know who I am because of my radio show. And Melinda was going to be bringing Logan, my 13-year-old, to me later on, so he didn't have to sit there and wait in line with me. But I was surrounded by friends and fellow Star Wars fans, and the only thing missing from the experience was having my dad with me, because my dad is probably the only person who would have not been sitting bored in line and appreciating the entire experience. You know, Logan would have been bored, understandably so. My wife would have been bored, understandably so. My brother may have been able to hang out with me. I think. I think the three of us could have done that and really enjoyed our company and just experiencing what was going on. They let us into the theater about 2.5 hours early, and the whole experience led to what will be for me a fantastic sort of ending to a new beginning. You know, as I've been talking about, this is the first time that we are going to be experiencing Star Wars like this in this way. You know, from here, I mean, you're never going to have the gap that we've had going into this movie. Now, based off the popularity of this movie, I still believe the hype coming up to the next film will be just as big. But there's never going to be this amount of anticipation and nervousness like we had going into The Force Awakens, because it had a very, very steep hill decline. J.J. Abrams had a tough task. He had to make a good movie. He had to introduce new characters. He had to appease the hardcore fans by bringing back, even for a very short period of time, the characters that we know and love. They had to craft a new mythology, and they had to set the stage. And that's a tall, tall order. And look, he pulled it off. I will say this. Well, let me get back to my story really quick. So, you know, I spent some time in the theater talking to people, and that, you know, and time just stood still that final hour. And then once the lights went down and the preview started, it was like, well, can we just get through these and get to the movie? And when finally the Lucasfilm logo came on and the blue letters of A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, it was just that moment. Like, I finally realized it. I really had been holding back and concentrating on not really thinking about it, because I was anticipating this moment for such a long period of time, and I couldn't believe that it had arrived. And it finally was like, oh my gosh, I'm watching a new Star Wars movie. And then it was game on. The opening crawl was absolutely spectacular. The movie, and again, we'll dance around and I'll get into more details of the movie, but the movie itself was exactly what I was hoping it was going to be in terms of just simplicity. It didn't need to be complicated. It didn't need to be mired in a lot of politics. Let's bring it back to its essence, and that's what J.J. Abrams did. And that crawl, just laying out, Luke has vanished. The First Order is rising to power. Leia is looking for her brother because they know they're going to need him to fight this evil. Plain and simple. And then, the movie rolls out, and it just, every scene, you're just trying to, use your eyeballs to swallow it all up. And it was almost a disservice. And this is what I wanted to talk about before we get into the details of the story itself. But I was going to review the film right after the first time I saw it, just to give my instinctive gut reaction. And I didn't. And I'm glad that I didn't, because it wouldn't have been a good assessment of the movie. Because of everything else involved, because of the fact that I do a podcast, because I love Star Wars, and it's a daily part of my life along with everything else, and I've been watching all the other movies, and I've been leading up to this moment, and I was discussing it with somebody at work, and I said, the first viewing for me was almost as if it was just another part of this process. It was another part of my fandom. Doing the podcast, watching the other movies, listening to other podcasts and other people's thoughts, and now watching the movie, and then discussing the movie, and then hearing other people talk about the movie, and then doing another podcast. You see, it was all part of a puzzle. It was a big piece of the puzzle that I continue to build throughout my life, and I will. But it was hard to view the movie just as a movie and sit back and enjoy it. Because when I was watching it, I found myself being overly critical. And I will say that people talked about, because I read some non-spoiler reviews before I saw the film, and people were talking about the similarities it was to A New Hope. And I found myself zeroing in on those things too much, that it took me out of the parts of the movie that had nothing and didn't mirror New Hope at all. That's not to say I was disappointed. It just is to say that my mind was going a bunch of different places during the film, that after that initial viewing, while I went, wow, that was great, there was this sort of feeling of disconnect. And it wasn't until the next day when I woke up and I began to think about the film that it was almost like, it was like a boat had run across a lake and just churned up the water in its wake, right? And they're rippling on the shores and all this stuff is just kind of getting churned up in the water. And it wasn't until the next day when the waters had kind of calmed and I was there to see what was left over, and then bubbling to the surface were all the different things I loved about the film, were all the things that stuck with me about the movie. Then the humor began. I began to think about the humorous scenes, and then I just kept going back to the visual, emotional display of Kylo Ren battling Rey there at the end, and that scene of the trees just getting slashed and how powerful it was just kept coming back to the forefront of my mind. And as I'm driving to work and I'm doing my radio show, and now it's the day it sort of officially opens, and more people are going to be seeing it, and I'm going to be seeing it later in the day, it all just kept sticking with me, and I suddenly found myself even more excited to see it a second time, talking about it with my producer, and because he had seen it on Thursday night too, and then driving home and listening to other spoiler reviews and people talk about it, and then going and seeing it with my family last night or yesterday afternoon, and on the second viewing where I could sit back and just watch it, I fell in love with it. I mean, it's a great, powerful movie, and it is my favorite one. And again, based off my own standards, I love the other films, but if you were to say, you're going to be put on an island, John, you're going to get a Blu-ray player and one Star Wars movie, which one is it going to be? It's going to be Star Wars The Force Awakens. I've had my time with the other films, and I will always watch the prequels. I will always watch the original trilogy. I will go back and watch those, and I'm actually looking forward to going back and watching A New Hope again, just because its closest brother, or if you will, or sister, is The Force Awakens. Much in the same way the